All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling this whole potential TikTok ban in the US.
Which, judging by the articles you guys sent in,
Yeah, you're definitely interested in.
seems like it's a big one.
It really is. And it's a lot more than just some app going away, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking free speech, national security.
International relations,
It's
even?
not.
It's all kind of wrapped up in this one thing.
Yeah, so where do we even begin, I guess, with how fast this is all happening?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at this law that's supposed to go into effect January 19th, 2025,
Right.
which basically means TikTok would vanish.
Like, poof, gone.
From app stores in the US, no new downloads, no updates.
Yeah.
It would even affect like the behind-the-scenes stuff,
Like what?
web hosting services, that kind of thing.
So it's like turning off the lights on TikTok here in the US.
Basically.
And we're not talking about a small group here, right?
No, not at all.
It's 170 million Americans on TikTok.
Huge.
More than half the country.
Yeah.
So what were they even thinking when they passed this law?
Well, there were two big worries.
Okay.
One was the Chinese government could be using TikTok to manipulate what Americans see.
Through ByteDance, right.
Exactly. That's the parent company.
Like, not just straight up censorship, but something sneakier.
Right. More like subtly pushing certain narratives, maybe burying others.
Trying to sway opinion without people realizing it.
That's the idea.
It's a little creepy when you think about it.
Yeah, a bit Orwellian.
And then there's the data thing, right? I mean, TikTok collects a ton of information on everyone.
Oh, yeah, and that's the other huge concern. It's not just that they're collecting data, tons of apps do that.
Right.
But it's the fear that the Chinese government could get their hands on it all.
Like all of it.
Contacts, locations, browsing habits, you name it.
And then they could use that for what? Espionage? Blackmail?
That's the worry. Some are even concerned about, using this information to pressure Americans into becoming spies.
Okay, now that is scary stuff.
It has a real national security angle.
You mentioned the Supreme Court earlier. They're actually involved in all this.
Yeah, they're right in the thick of it. They're deciding right now if this law violates the First Amendment rights of TikTok USA and its users.
Right.
The creators, the ones you always hear about.
So it's free speech versus national security.
That's the showdown.
What are the justices even saying about all of this?
Well, there's been back and forth, but some justices, especially Chief Justice Roberts,
Okay.
he hasn't seemed totally sold on this content manipulation argument.
Really?
Yeah, they're asking, is it really about controlling what's on TikTok?
Or is it just about getting China out of the picture?
Exactly.
That's a great point. But even if they don't buy that, the data collection issue has to be a big deal for them, right?
Oh, absolutely. The potential for abuse there,
Yeah.
that seems to have really resonated with the justices. Espionage, blackmail,
Yeah.
even potentially blackmailing future CIA officers, that came up.
Wow, okay. So let's talk outcomes here. If the court actually sides with this law, what happens to TikTok? Game over.
Well, it wouldn't be instant death, at least not for the app itself.
What do you mean?
The law mostly stops new downloads and updates.
Okay.
So if you already have TikTok, technically you could keep using it.
But wouldn't it become like a ghost town?
Yeah.
No new videos, no new users, just the same stuff on repeat.
That's the big question. Would people stick around?
Yeah.
And more importantly, what would TikTok do? Remember, they've got users all over the world.
Right.
Losing the US would hurt, but they'd probably find some way to stay, even if it's smaller, more limited.
It's crazy how we started with this one app, and now we're talking international relations, data espionage, Supreme Court drama.
It's a lot.
This deep dive has gotten complex fast.
That's the thing about this issue. It pulls on so many different threads.
And we haven't even gotten to Trump yet.
Oh, right, Trump.
He was all over the ban thing during his first term.
He was, wasn't he? But things have gotten interesting.
How so?
Well, he filed a brief asking the court to wait.
Really?
Says he wants to negotiate a solution himself once he's back in office.
So did he have a change of heart or what?
It's tough to say. Maybe he genuinely wants a different solution. Or maybe it's a political play.
The deal maker.
Exactly. Either way, it adds another layer to this whole thing.
This is getting wilder by the minute. A potential ban, a Supreme Court case that could rewrite the internet rulebook.
And now a new president who might just shake everything up again.
Where do we even go from here?
It shows how we're in uncharted territory. There isn't just TikTok, it's about how we handle these global platforms in a world that's more connected than ever.
Yeah.
We're facing these huge questions about security, free speech, the power of tech, all at once.
You're right, it's way bigger than just one app. But before we get lost in the big picture, let's get real for a sec. What does all this mean for the everyday TikTokers out there?
Well, if the court upholds the law and Trump doesn't step in, they might be looking at a TikTok blackout.
No more viral dances, no more connecting with friends.
That's right. It would be a big change for the online world.
And what about the creators, the people who actually make a living off TikTok?
For them, it's even more serious. Their income, their audience, their whole platform could vanish overnight.
So we're talking economic fallout, free speech restrictions, geopolitical maneuvering. This is shaping up to be way bigger than just TikTok, isn't it?
Absolutely. A landmark case with consequences that'll ripple outward.
Wow, okay. So lots to unpack here.
Definitely. Luckily, we have more time to explore it all.
We just went over some pretty heavy stuff like, what happens if TikTok actually gets banned?
Right, like what are the consequences?
Yeah, any chance of survival at all?
Well, it wouldn't be like instant death, not for the app itself at
Okay,
least.
so not totally gone.
Right. The law mostly focuses on new downloads and updates.
I see.
So anyone who already has it on their phone, they could technically keep using it.
But wouldn't it be kind of like a ghost town then?
Oh, yeah.
No fresh content, no new users?
Just the same videos playing over and over.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the question, right?
Would people stick around?
Would they? And what would TikTok even do? They have users all over the globe.
Right, it's huge.
So losing the US would be bad, but
They wouldn't just disappear.
I doubt it. They'd find some way to keep a presence here, even if it had to be smaller, more low-key.
So like secret TikTok servers, people using VPNs to get access.
You're not far off. It could get pretty cloak and dagger.
Like something out of a spy movie.
Right. And that's what makes you wonder, how effective would this ban really be?
That's a good point.
Would it actually solve the problems they're worried about?
Or would it make TikTok harder to track, harder to regulate?
Exactly. Like trying to squash a balloon, you push it down in one spot.
It pops up somewhere else.
Precisely. And that leads to another layer of this whole thing, Trump.
Oh yeah, Trump. He wanted to delay everything, said he wanted to work out a deal.
He did, didn't he?
What kind of deal could he even make?
Well, during his first term, there was talk of forcing TikTok to sell its US part.
To an American company.
Right. So if ByteDance, the Chinese company, isn't in control anymore.
At least in theory, that solves the security worries, right?
Yeah, that's the thinking.
New owner, TikTok stays in the US, everyone's happy.
If only it were that simple. A forced sale, it would open up a whole new can of worms.
Like what?
First off, who buys it? What role would the government even have in picking a buyer?
It does make you wonder, and wouldn't that set some kind of precedent? Like if the US can force a sale just because of where a company's from, what does that mean for other international businesses here?
It's a dangerous game, that's for sure.
And it gets into some pretty fundamental stuff, right?
Definitely. Free markets, government overreach. It gets messy fast.
So it feels like we're stuck. On one hand, there are these real worries about security, privacy.
Right, absolutely.
But then we have free speech, the right of businesses to operate without the government butting in.
You've put your finger right on the core of it.
It's tough.
It really is. This situation, it forces us to look at those competing interests head on.
And we can't forget about the people.
No, absolutely not.
Millions of users who use TikTok every single day.
Right, for entertainment, for connecting. For some, it's how they make a living.
Exactly. It's easy to get lost in the legal stuff, the politics. But we're talking about real people's lives here.
We are.
It makes you wonder what all of this says about the future of the internet, you know?
I know what you mean.
Are we headed for a world where the internet's all chopped up? Where what you can see, what you can access, it depends on where you live, what your government wants.
It's a troubling thought, isn't it? This whole TikTok thing, it could be a sign of what's to come. Governments getting more nervous about these big platforms.
Trying to control them.
Exactly. And we could end up moving away from that open, connected internet that we're used to.
It's almost like the ground is shifting under our feet.
It is a bit like that.
Like the whole landscape of the digital world is changing.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. We could be seeing a whole new digital order emerge.
Wow.
One where national interests and the free flow of information, they start to clash.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
But it feels important to understand.
Oh, it is.
Like, how might this change how we use the internet, how we interact with it?
Absolutely.
So let's bring it back to our listeners for a minute. What does this mean for them, really?
Well, I think the most important thing is we need to be smarter about all of this.
In what way?
Digital literacy, that's key now. We can't just be passive anymore.
Like clicking agree on terms of service without reading them.
Exactly. We need to know how these platforms work, what data they're collecting, how it's being used.
So we need to be more like informed digital citizens.
Yes, aware of our rights and our responsibilities in this new digital world.
Right, because things are changing fast.
They are.
So we need to be more aware of the data we're giving out, the content we're seeing.
Right, and the potential for manipulation, always keep that in mind.
But what about the content we're creating ourselves? Could this whole thing affect how we express ourselves online?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Like, if governments start having more control over platforms,
Yeah.
could people be less willing to speak up?
Oh, absolutely. If there's a fear of censorship, of getting in trouble,
It could have a chilling effect.
it could. People might think twice about sharing dissenting views.
Or criticizing anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And instead of a global village, what we get is a bunch of echo chambers.
Where everyone just hears what their government wants them to hear.
Exactly. It's a pretty dystopian picture, but we can't ignore the possibility.
It's like we're at this tipping point, aren't we?
It feels that way.
The decisions we make now about how we manage these platforms, they're going to have a huge impact on what happens next.
No doubt about it. The stakes are high for freedom of expression, for the future of online communication.
We've covered a lot of ground here, but it feels like we're just getting started.
You're right, we've only scratched the surface.
This is one complex issue.
It is, but that's what makes it so interesting, don't you think?
It definitely keeps things interesting. But with all this talk about control, about censorship, it can be a little discouraging.
Yeah.
Is there any room for optimism? Can these platforms, even with all their problems, actually be a force for good?
That's the question we should be asking. And yes, absolutely. It's easy to focus on the negatives, but we can't forget the good that comes from these platforms. They connect people across the world. They give a voice to people who might not otherwise be heard.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. There's still a chance for technology to be a force for good. I truly believe that.
That's good to hear.
But it takes effort. It takes us being active in shaping that future.
What do you mean?
We need to hold those in power accountable, support the platforms that are doing things the right way,
Yeah.
and most importantly, use these tools to build understanding, to connect with each other.
It's like we're at a crossroads.
Yeah,
The choices we make now about how we use tech, how we regulate it.
they're going to decide what kind of digital world we end up with.
Exactly. It's powerful stuff.
It is, and I think that's a great place to transition into our final thoughts on this topic.
So we've been through a lot in this deep dive. International stuff, legal battles, even the possibility of like a digital underground for TikTok.
We have, haven't we? It's been quite a journey.
It has. What are the big things to remember here as we figure out this whole online world that seems to be changing so fast?
Well, I think the first thing is that anything goes internet. The Wild West days,
Yeah.
they're over. Governments are waking up to how much power these platforms have.
And they want in on it.
They do. They want to control it.
So is that where we're headed then? A more fragmented internet, more rules, less freedom?
It's definitely possible. And that brings us to the second big takeaway. We can't just be casual internet users anymore.
Right, we have to be more informed.
Exactly. Digital literacy, it's not a nice to have, it's essential now.
We have to really understand how these platforms work.
The data they collect, how to sort out the truth from all the noise.
Level up our critical thinking skills.
Absolutely. And last but not least, we have to keep talking about this stuff.
You mean like we're doing now?
Exactly. Talking about the role tech plays in our lives, what we want the future to look like.
Because this TikTok thing is just one example, right?
It is. It's a sign of things to come. Tech is going to keep changing, keep raising new challenges.
Okay, so we've got to stay informed, stay engaged, keep asking those tough questions.
Couldn't agree more.
It feels empowering in a way, but I got to be honest, it still makes me a little nervous, you know?
I get it.
We've talked about a lot of downsides here, the risks of censorship, of control.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider.
But is there any room for optimism? Can platforms like TikTok, with all their problems, actually be a force for good?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, yes. We can't let the risks blind us to the good that can happen.
Like what?
These platforms, they can connect people across the world. They can give a voice to people who wouldn't have one otherwise.
They can even spark movements.
They can. So no, it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
There's a real chance for technology to be a positive force, I believe that.
But it takes effort.
It does. We have to be active in making that happen.
So what can we do?
We hold those in power accountable. We support platforms that do things right.
And we use these tools to connect, to understand each other better.
Exactly. We have a choice to make right now.
Like we're standing at a crossroads.
We are. How we use tech, how we regulate it, all of it.
That decides what kind of digital world we create.
I think you said it perfectly.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
It does. But before we go, we want to leave you all with something to think about.
A question to ponder as you navigate this whole digital world.
It's a big one.
It is. What will you do to help create an internet that serves humanity?
An internet that helps us, not controls us.
Exactly.
That's a powerful thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time for another exploration of the ideas that are shaping our world.